Welcome to episode 1 of In 10 Minutes with Symphonise Consulting. In this episode, we introduce Symphonise Consulting and this brand new podcast series. To tell us more about Symphonise Consulting and this series, here is founder and CEO, Etienne Chardlot.
Hi there, my name is Etienne and I am here for this very first episode of In 10 Minutes with Symphonise Consulting. Symphonise Consulting is a company I started 3 years ago, and to give you some understanding as to why I began Symphonise Consulting, I think we need to start at the beginning and talk a little bit about my background. So I began my working career in the mid-90s, fresh out of university, and my first ever job was working in IT support at a little engineering firm in Springs, my hometown. Springs is a little town in Gauteng in South Africa. And I joined this little engineering firm, and they had a Windows server and a network that I was hired to support, and they also had a great big black box standing in the middle of their server room. It was an AS400, an IBM mid-range machine. And this big black box fascinated me, that green screen environment. And after a few years at that company, self-taught on the AS400 and supporting that operating system, I got myself a job at a paper mill in the same town. And there they had two of these AS400s mirrored, and that was a whole new level of complexity. And after a few years supporting those machines and spending some time doing some business analysis for this paper mill, I then moved on to get a job at IBM. So now I was at the home of the AS400 and still working in that kind of support environment. Although now I was supporting a number of AS400s for a few different IBM clients scattered across the globe. Most of our clients were in Europe. And so I spent some time supporting these AS400s for a bunch of these clients across the globe. And within a few years of working for IBM, IBM shifted a lot of that AS400 support work to other countries. And so I was then forced out of technical roles into more managerial and supervisory type roles. And so I was moved onto the service desk that was looking after a bunch of South African clients. And one of those was a large telecommunications company. And over the years, we always used to joke at IBM that IBM stands for I've been moved, because they used to shift us around quite frequently. And so once I moved out of the technical support roles, I got some experience as a service desk supervisor, service desk manager, an operations manager. I spent some time in service level management and service level reporting, and I spent some time as a problem manager. And so in my time at IBM, which must have been about 6-7 years, I was introduced to a number of service management roles. And this got me interested in the IT infrastructure library, or ITIL, and IT service management more generally. And my knowledge of ITIL ended up with me taking on a training role at a company called Get It Right. And so Get It Right, their focus was on skills development, and the founder of that company took me on as a trainer and consultant, and this is where I spent the next 7 years. And I spent 7 years doing a lot of ITIL training in ISO 20000, the IT service management standard. It was where I was introduced to COBIT, the governance framework for IT. And so up to that point, I had some experience with projects, and I'd had lots of experience with IT service management, but never really with governance of IT. And so it was in this consulting role that I was really introduced to COBIT and the governance of IT, which became a focus area for me. And so a big focus area for me, based on my experience of governing IT, is really about making sure that there is strategic alignment between what IT departments are doing and what the larger organization is doing. And as we move into digital transformation, as we start using new technologies like AI, as we start becoming leaner, as we start becoming more agile, as organizations become more responsive, I've found that strategic alignment is key. And so that is something that drives a lot of the consulting work that I do, is how do we make sure that there is a match between IT and what the business is doing. And so we're not doing IT for IT's sake, but how are we making sure that IT is focused on the right stuff for the business. And so that is a big component of what I do as a trainer and as a consultant, is pass these skills on to people. So one of the reasons I started Symphonise Consulting was really to expand. So I went solo in 2017, left Get It Right, and started Symphonise Consulting 2 years later in 2019. And so this new company of mine really is involved in passing on a lot of this skill. And so as a consultant, as a trainer, that's what I do. I impart skills and I help people develop new ways of thinking about aligning the value that IT creates with the value that the business is trying to create. And I do this by offering a number of different APMG accredited training courses in project management, in change management, in governance of IT, in IT service management. And those really are my focus areas. And if you have a look at the Symphonise Consulting website, you'll see a number of these courses listed there. Over the next few weeks in this podcast series, I will talk a little bit and introduce you to some of the kind of broad subject areas that I train. Like, for example, in the next episode, I'll talk a little bit about agile project management and how we can make projects more responsive to changing customer needs. These days, the target is always moving, and a project that is focused on that has a goal that is a fixed target is generally bound to fail because the target tends to move. And so to avoid scope creep, it's easier to set our eye on a moving target, and just like a heat-seeking missile, we will change direction and we'll follow our target, and ultimately we will deliver what the customer really wants. And so I'll talk a little bit about agile project management in next week's podcast. But we're also going to talk a little bit about some of the other subjects that I train: information security, IT service management, the IT service management standard, ISO 20000. We'll talk a little bit about organizational change. We'll talk about agile. We'll talk about Scrum. And so there's quite a lot of topics that are coming up in the next few episodes. And then what I really want to do is, once I've introduced you to some of these high-level topics, the episodes from then on, I want to focus on either giving you advice or tips, or helping to solve some of the issues that you have found in your working environment. How do we make our IT service desk better? How do we improve customer satisfaction at our service desk? How do we overcome problems like scope creep? How do we embed these changes in our organizations when we're dealing with resistance to change? How do we become more agile? How do we become more responsive? And how do we make sure that what our IT department is doing is meeting real business needs, and we're not just investing in IT for IT's sake? And so those are many of the topics that I plan to address in this podcast series over the next few weeks. The plan is to bring out an episode at least once a week. Where I can, I'll bring out episodes more frequently than that, but the idea is to bring out an episode once a week, 10 minutes each time, so we don't spend too much of your time. I'd like you to stay in touch with me. If you have any questions, if you have any topics that you'd like addressed in this podcast series, you're welcome to send me an email. My email is on the company website, and the website will appear on your screen in a moment, but you can always email me at training@symphonise.consulting, and that's the easiest way to get hold of me. So thank you for your time, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you for taking the time to join us for this episode of In 10 Minutes with Symphonise Consulting. If you have enjoyed today's episode, please join us again. Subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss out on future installments. Please spread the word to others so that they may also benefit from this informative series of podcasts.